Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm Kathy, and this season is dedicated to exploring the unique world of raising boys. Parenting boys today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code, a mystery, especially when it comes to understanding their inner emotional world. Together, we'll dive into real life stories, share practical tips, and uncover insights to help you and your son thrive, not just survive. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's unlock the parenting code, one boy at a time. Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today we're talking with Claire Noyelle about the fascinating world of neuroscience, hypnotherapy, and parenting. Claire started her career as a pharmacist, and almost a decade ago, she transitioned into solution-focused hypnotherapy, blending science and brain-informed strategies to help young people, especially those with neurodivergent diagnoses, to help them build confidence, resilience, and a future that they're excited about. As a single mom of three, including a son with ADHD and autism, Claire brings both personal and professional expertise to understanding how our brains work and how we can harness that knowledge to support our children. She's passionate about breaking myths around hypnotherapy, empowering people to take charge of their mental and physical health, and helping families navigate challenges with a neuroscience-backed approach. I'm really excited to talk about brains, boys, and hormones and the power of mindset. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. I'm looking forward to our discussion. It's going to be fun.
Well, me too, and I'm looking forward to it because I was really thinking about this, and I really want to dive into that connection between neuroscience and boys. So lately, on a personal um, binge, I guess I've been really trying to understand how testosterone drives so much as far as the males, like physical, mental, everything connected with their development
Mm.
and the connection between the testosterone and the brain. So I wonder if you could share some insights about how those things tie together, connected with boys' development.
I think it's still an area that's undergoing huge research, particularly in kind of the arena around trans children, because obviously that's a huge thing. But I think there's a lovely phrase from one of the neuroscientists that's quite well known called Robert Sapolsky, and he describes testosterone as being a magnifier, that having higher levels of testosterone just brings bigger feelings. So bigger feelings around kind of intense connection, but bigger feelings around anger, bigger feelings around lots of things. So testosterone, he feels, has the impact of magnifying those personality traits that we associate with being masculine. Strength, loudness, presence, if you like. I think it's still under research as to how that changes across that kind of puberty to adult transition and what exactly the impact is on the brain. But we do know that the brain changes hugely between kind of childhood through adolescence and then isn't finished being fully formed and fully wired until we're 25. And that process starts from the back here and it goes all the way across until the last part of our brain that gets fixed and finalized and adultified is that executive function bit, which is why children tend to leave those decisions and those wildly varying executive function right up until they're 25.
And like, what are the differences with the female brain?
Well, we still have testosterone. We still have
Mhm.
testosterone in the same way that males still have estrogen. But in terms, there's actually a really close connection between levels of estrogen and testosterone. Testosterone is made from estrogen. And in terms of how that changes the wiring, I'm not an expert, but I do feel like it has that huge impact in terms of wiring in different parts of that brain. Women, females tend to have a mature executive functioning brain earlier than boys do, but we don't treat them differently. We expect boys to be just as mature, to make the same decisions as girls, but at the same time giving them a hard time for not being able to. I think that's the big paradox. They are maturing slower, but we expect more of them. And I think that's
Yeah.
such a difficult thing for boys.
Yeah, that's why this really quite fascinates me because I think it's kind of at the core of everything that our expectations are not based on what the reality is, and we're not
No,
recognizing those differences. We're treating
no.
everybody the same, and males and females just aren't the same. So it's exciting that there's becoming more of an understanding, but it's still the awareness
Mm.
definitely is not widespread yet.
And it's inconsistent too, Kathy. I think we expect our children to change in a linear fashion, that they should suddenly start from being little to adolescence to adult. But it's more of a wavy line. I know you've got boys, but there are times when your child, your boy will act absolutely mature and you're like, wow, I've created this amazing person. I've done a great job of parenting. And then a night later, you could be getting a phone call from a teacher, from the police, because they've done something epically stupid. And they're still the same child, but their brain development changes really, really quickly. Things get wired in, their decision-making process changes, and it's not a linear process. I think it's very variable. So different days, different mindset, different approach, different neurology, even in a very short space of time.
Yeah. I actually, one of the things that really started me to have a different view about testosterone and just trying more to understand exactly what is going on in that brain of that young boy that's developing. But it was actually a TED talk by by a transgender person who had
Mm,
gone from female to male, so had
yeah.
received the testosterone. And one of the things that she was saying was when her hormones started that change and she had this flood of testosterone that she had had no idea beforehand what a young male was going through when they would get that surge, like usually in
Mm,
puberty. And when that surge happened, it was like she was when the way she explained it was she said like her whole focus as a male was really it was all based on sexual impulses,
yeah.
but it was overwhelming. Even though, didn't want to walk down that road, it was like having to have constant control that it wouldn't escape. And when I heard it, it was like, we really have females, we really have no idea what our boys are going through when they go through those different stages and what that must feel like as another human being. It just kind of boggles me.
I think there's a real lack of understanding about that both ways, isn't there? Men have no understanding of how it feels to be a woman and vice versa. And I think those two streams of information are kept very much within that lineage. If you're a boy, you talk about it with boys. Even I don't know if it's the same for you, but our children have separate sex education. So boys
Yeah.
learn about boys in a group of boys. Girls learn about how their bodies change within a group of girls. They don't learn about each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like that you're right, that is missing such a huge element of that education because if you understood a little bit more, there'd be a bit more compassion and empathy for what seems irrational, but actually is quite biological. And
Hmm.
I'm reminded a little bit, I know we're not related closely, but elephants, it's well accepted that elephants go through that time of must, which is all about reproduction, and that is accepted that they're going to be much more aggressive, much more dangerous, and very single-minded. And it seems unlikely to expect that other mammals wouldn't appreciate, wouldn't have that kind of experience. So that's not, I think that's such an untapped area of research and education.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's fascinating.
Mm.
I actually hadn't planned on starting off that way, but it was no control.
Yeah.
What I would really like to understand is how you went from being a pharmacist to getting into hypnotherapy and neuroscience. Like, what was that transition? Like often there's something that sparks,
Mm.
that turns that corner.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
It was almost accidental, if I'm honest. A lot of because I now teach hypnotherapy as well, and a lot of the students that I teach come to want to be therapists because they've experienced therapy themselves and think, oh, I would love to do that. Mine was different. I had a friend who was training, and we'd spoken about that transition for her. She was a copywriter, and she'd made that transition. And then she said, oh, it'd be a really useful skill that you would add to your pharmacy skill set, perhaps in working with those with dependence issues or addictions. I thought, well, that might be quite interesting. So I went along and signed up for the course almost out of curiosity. But as part of the process, you are expected to submit a portfolio of working with clients to sort of road test your knowledge and your expertise. And I found that the clients I was working with, even as a student, were hugely benefiting, particularly in areas that pharmacy doesn't work so well in. So, obviously, in mental health areas, because we know that medication isn't always the answer for that, but also in more of the physical things, particularly IBS, that was a big one, in migraines and in pain relief. So, all things that traditional pharmacy, traditional medication doesn't work so well with, it seems that solution focused hypnotherapy does. And so, it was a really nice, moment of this is interesting. I could probably do more of this. And so I've done less pharmacy and more therapy over the years that followed.
Where were you in your personal life at that point? Like, how old were your boys and your
That's an
daughter?
interesting question. I had actually not long got divorced, and I think I was also looking for something that would add to my learning, add to kind of my skill set within the children. But I don't think I really realised how useful it would be until I was part way through it, because it is talking about what everyone's brain needs to function at their best. And while principally, when I was working as a student, I was working with adults, it's so obvious how beneficial an understanding of how your brain works, what it needs to function at its best, what happens when it's gone a little bit off kilter, and how you get it back on track. That lends itself beautifully to teens and young people because at a time when they're starting to question how they cope, what they can do, why they feel a certain way, that without any judgment is, well, this is what your brain's doing. And it's a really nice thing to give them, a really nice understanding and a resource that that's normal. This is what happens. This is how you can make it feel better for yourself. And that
Mhm.
was a lovely thing. And we kind of wish I'd started it earlier. I didn't know about it, but if I'd had that same kind of education and experience in that kind of thing when mine were preschool and school age, that would have been really helpful. So I have vowed to use it better as and when I get grandchildren. I'll
Well,
start early with it.
yeah, I'm actually a little bit surprised. I've been thinking a lot about self-hypnosis since I was talking to
Mm,
you. And when I was remembering my own experiences, it's like it was one of the few things that could remedy a physical problem without having to dig into, all those dark corners in your past. Like you could just
that
move
is
on.
exactly it. That's hence the kind of separate little corner of the hypnotherapy world, solution focused. Because a lot of counselling tends to be quite regressive in nature. It's looking back over those experiences and how they've shaped you. Other things do too. But solution focused therapy is almost the acceptance of, okay, this is where you are. This is what we've got. How do we get you moving forward? What would you like life to look like? What can we do to get you there? So hypnosis is one tool of that. The other part of the session is using solution-focused questioning techniques, which is relatively modern in the sort of self-help and therapy world, but is practical, positive, and forward-looking, which I think people prefer. Nobody really wants to leave a therapy session in floods of tears and feeling terrible about themselves, having remembered things they thought they'd sort of put to one side. Instead, my clients will leave me feeling quite buoyed up and excited about the week ahead because we've been talking about approaching their challenges in a more positive and practical way.
Yeah, the other thing that I learned from that time, which um, unfortunately I haven't been consistent and but it's in my mind, it's in my experience. But especially today, because there's such a recognition for the power of meditation. So
Mm,
what I remember as like a side benefit, like when I was exposed to this, I was in university. So, that was in the late 70s. So it was a long time ago. But I can still remember
huge
very
history.
clear,
Yeah.
yeah. I can remember very clearly one of the benefits that I didn't realize could be possible was when, just for myself, if I would practice self-hypnosis. I guess that's how you say it. But I could, feel like I had had an 8 hour sleep, after 20 minutes.
Yes.
So
Yes, that's
I'm
a lovely,
assuming,
lovely thing.
yeah,
Mm.
I'm assuming that's the connection between, meditation. It's a different kind, but again, I think, why isn't this more
Yeah.
widespread? It was so easy, but so beneficial.
I think there's two different things here. One is that meditation and hypnosis they look similar from the outside, but they're actually different in terms of what they're doing for your brain. So both of them involve that very calm, slow breathing. But with meditation, depending on what kind you do, it's all about kind of focusing and refocusing your brain. If your brain wanders off, your idea is to bring it back to a noise, a sound, a feel, or a thought. With hypnosis, quite often you're doing it alongside somebody speaking. So I use almost like a bedtime story for my clients, which is quite visual, quite descriptive. And so you're imagining that kind of thing. But then your brain is almost encouraged to wander off and think about things for you, almost like your conscious mind is thinking about the imagery and the visualization so that your subconscious can almost like roll its sleeves up and get on with pondering the things that you've got going on in the back of your head on your mental to-do list, so that by the end of it you've had some kind of resolution. And I feel like that sort of internal filing is what makes us feel calm and rested, because we've actually managed to put that down for a minute and take away some of the brain power that went to, I mustn't forget that, I must do that, I must do this, trying to resolve that. In hypnosis, you can use your subconscious for that rather than your conscious, which is much more efficient at it.
So that would be extremely helpful for someone like me who is I just have a monkey brain. Like it never
Yes.
stops. It never stops. I'll
This
wake up
is
in
the
the middle
same.
of the night. Yeah. So it's
Yeah, this is
yes.
why I've struggled with meditation, because my brain just wanders off,
Yeah.
and I felt really like quite a failure really, because everyone else seems to find this so useful. Why am I finding it so
Yeah.
hard? But then when you realize that you can get similar benefits in terms of calm state of mind, in terms of a relaxed physiology, in terms of stress lowering from doing something that personally I find easier, which is imagery and
Yeah.
visualization and creativity, that's great. There's
Yeah.
many, many different ways to find that calm, natural state. And if you can do it with meditation, that's fantastic. But there are some little caveats to that, because if you're really trying hard to refocus your brain every time it wanders off, which is the aim of meditation, if you do that too close to bedtime, you've almost like laser focused your mind and it's quite hard to sleep. So I think for me,
Mm.
the reading that I've done, meditation, if you're using it for sleep, is probably best done earlier in the day rather than right before bedtime. Whereas hypnosis, because of its creative dream-like associations, works beautifully for going to sleep, because your brain just wanders off and powers down really nicely.
Oh, that's interesting. Have you taught your children how to do this?
I don't do the trance with them now. I did when I was training, because I basically had to use them as guinea pigs. I was like, you will sit here and you will listen to my hypnosis talk. But I don't do the hypnosis with them now. My younger son quite likes meditation and trance, but the other two don't. But I do use the solution focused questioning in a very
Mhm.
subtle, stealth way, because they don't want mum therapizing them. So.
When you have people come into you and you help them with this in this way,
Mm.
like, do they also learn how, like, that's what I remember is it was self-hypnosis, so that whatever I learned when I was with the person, I could take away and do it on my own when I wanted to. Is that the same in your practice?
Yeah, essentially, except that if all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, because I can't put you into a trance. You have
Yeah.
to accept that state of mind. So all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And there are different ways to enter a hypnotic trance. I use guided visualization, a guided
Mhm.
relaxation. And so my clients have an audio which they can download from my website, and I get them to play that when they're going to bed. So it gives that conscious monkey brain, as you
Hmm.
called it, something to focus on while that sort of sleep power down happens. So yes, they go away with that tool, but they also can use that as much as you want. You can't overdose on hypnosis. It's quite nice
Hmm.
to use that during the day. If I work with women who are going to give birth, then obviously I need to teach them self-hypnosis in a slightly more autonomous way. Might want to be able to focus that intention inside to deal with sort of pain and so on
Yeah.
during labour. So that's a slightly different technique, but most of them will just use the audio, the guided visualization to sleep or to relax during the day.
Actually, that was the person who I can't remember if she was a psychotherapist or but it was a pilot program. And the reason that she was doing this research on the power really of hypnosis was because she suffered from a in a car accident. She had some
Mm,
unfixable something with her arm, and nothing worked to alleviate the pain. And she had kind of just had enough of feeling the groggy and the side effects from strong pain
yeah.
medication. And
Mm,
that's what, and she started that practice, and that's what that was her turning point
mm,
because of the power
absolutely.
of it.
Yeah, it can be very helpful. There's research in the UK that shows that using a guided visualization or a relaxation audio before anesthetic means that you need lower doses of anesthetic, you need lower doses of pain relief as you recover. That's got to be a bonus because that
Yeah,
groggy feeling is what stops people being released from hospital, isn't it? So I
yeah,
think that's a really useful tool. And I know that using visualization generally can be really helpful with pain. I've read recently about people having their dressings changed after burn injuries, which obviously are incredibly painful. And they've been using, it's not quite hypnosis, but they've been using VR technology to imagine themselves in a cold, icy
hmm,
landscape so that the sensations they feel where the dressings are being changed, their brain is attributing to that cold landscape rather than discomfort and pain from the dressings. And I think that ability to play with sensations, to reframe one feeling as another, that's a really helpful technique that hypnosis can put into play for you. Your brain is very plastic in that sense, and playing
yeah.
around with the boundaries of that is useful.
Very, I would think it'd be a very interesting field to be working in.
Mm,
Okay, but so now I want to get back to you as a mom, although I find all the other
yes.
stuff extremely fascinating, and I'm sure that it impacts, every area of your parenting as well.
Mm,
So, raising three children as a single
yes.
mom, especially through the teenage years, must have had
Mm.
its challenges. What was that period like for your family? What, like some of the biggest challenges and how you navigated them? And did you
Yeah,
personally notice any difference in the teen years between your boys and your daughter?
yes. I think it's really interesting. Everyone's an expert when you have your first child and you sort of
Hmm.
think, okay, I've got the hang of this, I've nailed this. And then you have another one, and that's completely different. The different personalities. And I think that's accentuated when you've had a boy first and then a girl. And particularly because my eldest is the one with additional needs. He has the ADHD and autism. So, he is very intelligent, he's a really smart child, but focus was difficult for him. So that was a very different prospect because my daughter is very good at revising and focusing and academically. So that was one was very high maintenance. She was very easy from that point of view, as was my youngest. But in other ways, they're very different. So both my boys are quite relaxed, quite happy around people. My daughter prefers things to be quieter and calmer. So there are personality differences, but I think boys are often louder and more physical in their play. And I was always quite grateful I had two boys because they would entertain each other and leave her to do something different. And I think that's an interesting because she didn't want to play the same games that they did. They do now. They entertain themselves quite happily. But I think when they're younger, boys prefer much more physical games. And I don't think girls always want to join in. I think that's a broad generalization, but certainly that difference is quite stark.
What was the age span between the three of them?
They're quite close in age, so they're now young adults. My youngest will be 24, my daughter will be 26, and my eldest is 27. So there, I had three under three, which was probably not a tactical move.
Okay, so what did that look like in the teen years?
Yeah, our education system is a little different to yours, but that meant that my daughter was doing her A levels, which is at 18, while my youngest son was doing his GCSEs at 16. So both really important, crucial exams to go through school. And that was quite tense because both of them were under extreme pressure, which they handled in different ways very well and both did very well. But I remember that being quite a tough time because they wanted peace and quiet to study, and my eldest one was not studying at that point and was quite chaotic. So there were differences there, definitely. But coming back to that same question we had about boys and girls, I think schools probably need to think about structuring lessons and revision strategies different for boys and girls. I think boys probably learn slightly differently. I know that behaviour styles and learning styles has been a little bit overly emphasized, but I do think there are differences in how boys can focus. So, like we said, that executive function is not quite there. They work better doing little chunks and often, whereas I found my daughter could focus for much longer and was able to do that in a slightly different way.
You know, one of the things that I found heartbreaking, and I've seen it, with teenagers, teenage boys, and with our own son. But I remember a time in particular where, like, he just struggled to go to sleep at a reasonable time, whereas he had
Mm,
always been a good sleeper. And all of a sudden, I would go into his room and it would be way past bedtime. He'd still be up. Um, his mood was changing. I'm assuming this is a lot of the hormonal changes going through with puberty. But I remember
mm,
asking him at one time because he just didn't seem to be himself. Like he was, a little on edge, a little what people say typically is the teen years, but it wasn't typical in our world. And I was a little concerned about him. And I remember going in one night when he should have been asleep hours before, and just asking him, like, what's going on? Why do you always seem
mm.
angry? Like, and it just broke my heart because he felt so bad. He said, "I don't know, Mom. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on." And I thought, why don't we know? Why, if we don't know, if we don't have that awareness, we can't help our boys. So I found it heartbreaking. And that's why I was
Mm.
asking what it was like for your family.
Yes, I'd almost forgotten that kind of nocturnal shift that happens as well. You're right. And I think definitely that shift from junior bedtime to a more adolescent bedtime is really difficult to manage because I think UK schools start later than US schools, but even so, they're naturally wanting to go to bed at 11 midnight, but
Yeah.
you know as a mum that they need 8 hours of sleep. And so if they have to be up at 6, you want them in bed way earlier. And that disconnect is really, really challenging. And I'd almost forgotten about that. And that's the other thing is that as adults, we forget how we felt at that
Yeah.
age. And we think that, oh, well, we're an adult. We don't feel like that anymore. And we've almost forgotten the emotional roller coaster and the intense feelings and the anguish and all the different things that you can feel as a child, as a young person, because we've moved on and we forget. And I
Yeah.
think once you've gone through that, there's a sort of amnesia that happens as an adult that you forget how it was as a teenager. And so when your children start to behave like that, it comes out of the blue.
Yeah, and
And
I
I think
think also
that's really difficult.
and the lack of understanding between males and females.
Yes,
So I'm coming at it as a woman. And so this
absolutely.
behavior doesn't make sense to me, but it certainly makes sense to him. So yeah, it's quite I
Mm,
think we could really use a lot more compassion and empathy for our boys during that
I
period of
think
time.
so. I think so. And I think sleep is something that is really something that we are
Yeah.
getting. I think asking young people to start school as early as they do just completely disregards that shift in their chronology that they are wanting and needing and not ready to go to bed at that point in time. And it's not linked to phone use, really. I know that's something that gets tangled up in it, but there is a shift in that internal body clock.
Yeah.
And yet we just ignore that and carry on expecting them to get up at what is really, really early for them in the morning, and that they're not mentally able to function at that time in the morning. And we're expecting them to make big decisions about their education, to focus and to strategize, and they just can't do it. And if
Well,
that
and
carries on, that's just more and more building up on that sleep deficit. And that in itself then shows up as a cognitive issue or masquerades as ADHD or has other issues in terms of their immune system that can have an impact. I think we are doing our young people a disservice with that, sadly.
yeah, yeah, I agree completely. Having a son with ADHD and
Mm.
autism must have brought unique parenting experience. What were some of the most important lessons that you learned about supporting a neurodivergent child? And on the flip side, what have been some of the greatest gifts and joys that came from that experience?
They're very closely interwoven, and I think the biggest light bulb moment for me was recognizing that my brain does not work how his does. So much like we were having that male-female divide, there is that neurotypical neurodivergent divide where no matter how much I try and think about it, I cannot make my brain think in the same fashion as his. And so I almost have to learn his approach to life in almost to be able to strategize with it. So I'm quite comfortable working with people with ADHD because I've learned to almost flit about and follow that very erratic train of thought. But in the same way, people with autism often prefer routine and predictability. So I've got good at predicting where that would go off the rails. So I think the biggest thing was trying to put myself in his shoes and understand what his brain was doing. And it's hard when you think about what you're expecting of a child. It's like that constant awareness of everything around you. ADHD is a very bizarrely named disorder because it's not a lack of attention. They've got attention all over. They have a 360 attention. It's focusing and picking which of those stimulus is the most important. And 99 times out of 100, it's not you as a parent, it's everything else that you're competing with. And so, learning that and kind of changing how I would give him information or how I would ask information, that made the biggest difference.
It almost sounds like if we had the same kind of curiosity and
Yeah.
not making assumptions about all children, really. I'm thinking mostly of boys, but if we had that same curiosity and not assuming we knew what was going on, things might be better for everybody involved.
And I think it's expectations, isn't it? As
Yeah.
neurotypical children can sit still for longer than a child with ADHD. That doesn't mean that the child with ADHD isn't paying attention. And I think occasionally you get these wonderful, wonderful unicorns of teachers who understand that and are happy to break the rules. And we had one particular one that sticks in my head, and she was a diamond. And she would say to my eldest, that if I know you're listening, but if you're going to move around, go behind everybody else, sit at the back of the class, roll around on the carpet, because I know you can do that and pay attention. And that made his life so much easier because he could then move, but that freed him up to pay attention. It's almost as if that moving frees up a little bit of bandwidth so you can pay attention. And teachers who break the rules like that, teachers who are prepared to see outside the normal boundaries, she got so much more out of him than the other teachers who just used to shout at him for not being able to sit still. And I think, again, there's lessons to be learned there. There are probably more children that are not diagnosably ADHD, but struggle in a way that they would be happier if they could sit on the floor in a chair, if they could look out the window while listening, if they could fiddle with something because that allowed them to focus or got rid of that drive to move. I think a little bit more variation in teaching styles would be so lovely. And I know there are teachers that want to do that but feel stifled in the same way.
There's two things in what you said. One of them is I can remember, doing professional development with teachers connected with the little
Mm.
boys in their classroom. And I would ask them because they would all say, Tommy doesn't pay attention. He can't sit during circle time. And, the same kind of
Or is he?
story.
Yes, exactly.
It's that's normal for a little
Yeah.
boy. And I would ask them, before you make the assumption that he's not listening to what you're saying, ask him a question based on what you've said
Yeah.
when you think he's not paying attention. And like almost 100% of the time, that little
Hmm.
boy can answer you really well because it's just his way. He learns better when his body is moving. So that was one thing that was quite
Yes.
interesting. And the other thing that I've noticed, especially, oh, I'd say in the last decade, maybe, like my experience, most of my career has been in international schools. And in some ways, I sometimes think they're a little bit more open-minded because of just the culture of
Mm,
the environment they're in. But I see that when I go into the schools, like they have this special cushions for children who need that support. They have the weighted blankets for children who feel more
yes.
comfortable. They have these tools and strategies. It's still nowhere near it should be, in my opinion, but there seems to be more recognition that there are some things that can happen in the classroom that would support children better. So,
Oh, absolutely. I have fidget toys in my therapy room all the time. But you've reminded me of something else. The need to go outside and move and to run around and to burn off energy. That in itself has a really beneficial effect on how we learn. When we exercise and when we exercise at quite a high level, so your heart rate is going fairly fast, your brain releases a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. BDNF is the kind of sticky glue that fixes nerve connections together. So, for argument's sake, if you've been teaching children about a mathematical concept and they've learnt that and they've got all those facts and they've got the idea, the understanding is percolating, letting them run around, play at a fairly high intensity, generate this BDNF chemical in their brain, that helps those nerves, that connections, those memories, those patterns to fix. So they are better at learning. And then when you go to bed and sleep overnight, those memories are cemented, they're stored. So we are benefiting our children's learning by allowing them to move in that fairly intense and vigorous way. And again, I think we do our kids a disservice if we don't allow them to do that. And there's so much more focus on sitting still and paying attention than there is about running around. And as you all know from teaching boys and teaching children with autism, not all autistic children are comfortable with eye contact. They don't like it. They would rather look to one side. They're still paying attention, but they can't make that obvious I'm paying attention sign that neurotypical kids do. So you have to interpret their language a little differently. And that's
mhm.
something that I've noticed when I'm working with my own clients. Being able to work with that and know that that doesn't mean they're not listening to you, but they are, they're just thinking in a different way.
Well, there's a fair amount of research that, says that in general, boys, they communicate better side by side, whereas females are more
Oh,
comfortable face to
yes.
face. But the other thing you were saying, just recently, I was listening to some kind of a podcast, and they were talking about the differences. They were talking about young boys and learning, and they were talking about boys' schools and how the single-sex schools change their environment to cater to the whatever
Mm.
sex it is. And so in the boys' schools, they at least double the amount of recess time that they have, which is something that most national schools are cutting back on. So they double, so the same concept of the physical activity is something that will increase their capability to be successful in
Yeah,
the classroom and be successful learning, but we don't see it that way. So, and if
no,
if we
like
know
you said, they
this,
take it out. I think that's
yes.
crazy, isn't it? You know how your
Well,
brain works. Actively
it,
doing something that's stopping your child from learning. Put it back.
Oh, yes, and don't just like if that's recognized and understood that that's successful when you're dealing with a single sex group, why not adapt some of that when it is, male female group rather
Mm.
than completely cutting it out? Like there are some things that, you got to shake your head about, I think.
I
There was
think,
something I wanted to ask you. So, teenage
mm,
boys, especially, are often labeled as impulsive or risk takers. And I understand a little bit about that, but can you explain like the teenage boy's brain as far as risk taking goes?
yeah, I think there's this misconception that they don't think about their actions. And I think that's not strictly fair because I do think teenagers think about their actions, but they don't have such a layer of experience to filter that through. In their head, their plan is going to be great. It's all going to work. That's a really good idea. They don't have the adult level of experience and second-hand knowledge that shows them that, well, research shows us that probably isn't a very good idea. So they are thinking through their consequences, but they're using a very different algorithm. I think that's the best way to put it. They're not filtering it through years of wisdom and accumulated knowledge. They learn through experience of their own. They're not very good at learning through your experience that you share with them or a book that they've read it in. They kind of want to road test it themselves before, because that has more of an impact. And that kind of holds true for lots of things. We make our decisions ourselves, we tend to stick to them. If you're told what to do, we don't necessarily deal with that in the same way. It doesn't get quite the same weight. And I think when a teenage boy runs that what shall I do algorithm through their head, they're coming out with a completely different answer based on their own risk factors, their own critical incident report. They're not thinking about it with an adult logic. They're thinking about it from a much more emotional, a much more what's going to work best right here, right now. Teenagers are famously short-sighted. They are the ultimate live in the moment creatures, aren't they?
Hmm.
Talking about revision and planning ahead for exams. They don't care. What's more fun in the next 5 minutes? And there's a joy and a simplicity to that. And I think, again, we sort of squash that out of them. But I think if you can balance that, allowing them to road test things safely within the parameters of what is safe and not harmful, but also allowing them to learn from their own wisdom and from their peers. Because if we let them, they will come up with some amazing things.
Hmm.
Teenagers are very creative. They will question what we tell them. Well, why is it like that? And sometimes they're right. Sometimes
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I don't know. Why do we do it that way? This would be a much better idea. And teenagers, because they're thinking creatively, their brains are wired slightly differently because they're still in flux. They can often come up with some brilliant ideas.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it's genuinely worth listening to teenagers and allowing them to question the stuff that they question, because it might make a big difference. But they are living for the next big thing. What's going to make me feel best in the next 5 minutes? Is it tidying my room, or is it playing on the PlayStation?
So there's two things there that I want to say. One of the things with the last thing you were talking about is I don't know where I heard it or how it came into my parenting, but it was especially as he got older. It was, when, your child says they want to do something and
Mm,
that is not a good idea. Like it to your core. But you also
yes,
know if you say no, you're just going to, like,
you're
if
making
someone
it more attractive. It's a
that
challenge. Why?
exactly, because I'm that way. So what I incorporated and it just carried over to everything, it was like, convince me. This is why I think it's not a good idea. Convince me that it is
Yeah.
a good idea. And it's that same thing you said. Sometimes he was right. Like he had a perception that I hadn't thought of. And so,
Hmm.
I could see where he was coming from. Other times, as he was trying to convince me, he realized himself, oh, that really isn't such a good
Yes.
idea. And it was a
And that's
win-win
a
for both of
much
us.
more powerful realization, because you haven't convinced him, he's realized himself. That decision, because his own brain has made it, is rewarded with much higher levels of our reward
Yeah.
chemistry than
Yeah.
being told to by his mum. So I think that strategy of explain to me why you think this is a good idea, or what do you think would happen if you do that? Why is that so important to you? Thinking through that
Yeah.
in a more logical way, you're building skills and resources that next time something comes up, he's now got a template to run that through for himself, hasn't he? And I think that
Exactly.
is a much more powerful teaching method than no. And I also think that actually sometimes we need to let them make their own mistakes, clearly within limits. But children and young people are actually far more capable than we give them credit for. I know
Mhm.
it is endemic in us as parents and as mums to keep them safe and keep them where we have control because they're so very precious to us. But actually, their job is to kick against that and learn to be independent. In the same way that, other animals leave their mums and go off and live on their own, our teenagers need to do the same thing, but we've artificially stretched out that time that they're connected to us, and we sort of keep them for a bit longer than they need to. They're
Well, and
capable of
really, yeah, or for us anyway, I wanted him to make mistakes while he was still under our roof so we'd have an
Yes,
opportunity to talk about it.
yes.
So when he was on his own, the mistakes, uh, wouldn't end up being disastrous for him. There was one other thing that you, when we're talking about risk taking, I
Mm,
had read or heard someplace, and so I'm not sure, which is why I'd like you to comment on it. I had read someplace that for boys, there is a hormone or a chemical that is released when they take a risk. And it's the same for everybody, I guess. But for some reason, it's stronger in especially adolescent boys. So this,
mm.
when they do something that is risk taking, no matter what it is, there is some reward, hormonal chemical reward that comes that just feels, really good. Like it's a real success thing.
Yes,
Do you
I
know
would
what I'm
imagine.
talking about?
Yeah, I would imagine they're talking about dopamine. Dopamine is a really multi-purpose chemical as far as the brain goes. It acts as a hormone, it acts as a neurotransmitter, and it's also involved in reward and motivation and movement. So it does lots of different things. And it also gives us that sense of, yes, that was really good. And that is quite a feeling. So when we do something that has challenged us, that's pushed us just outside our comfort zone, that counts as risky or daring or difficult, but there's a payoff at the end, that's definitely a dopamine motivated and mediated pathway. And the weird thing with dopamine is that it feels good. And when your brain goes, oh, that was nice, do that again, the next time we do it, you almost want to make it bigger and more intense. But because of the way that your brain structures reward, it's kind of cautious and goes, yes, do it again, but I'm not going to give you quite as much dopamine this time. I don't want you having too much. And so you end up doing bigger, bolder, braver, scarier, stupider things to get that same hit. And it's self-reinforcing. It's dopamine that is behind things like dependence on drugs, on alcohol, on cigarettes, on gambling, on sex, all that sort of thing. They're all reward mediated by dopamine. And so that's quite pernicious because you get to this big high, and then when your dopamine is all kind of withdrawn and recycled, that crash feels really miserable. And the only way to feel better, your brain reasons, is to go back out and do that thing again. That's how we end up becoming dependent on things and seeking bigger and bigger thrills, bigger and bigger risks. And that's fine if those risks are safe, legal, and not going to involve anyone getting hurt. But if they get bigger and bigger and they're chemically mediated through drugs and alcohol, that can be problematic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And I think I don't know this for sure, Kathy, but I think when we were talking at the beginning about testosterone magnifying those feelings, I reason in my head at least that testosterone probably magnifies that. And I think there's also that competitive nature between boys that is linked to testosterone that makes them, well, if he's done that, I need to do this. And that magnifies it more.
I've read things as well which add on to that, like why, especially during those adolescent years, the teen years, boys have more tendencies to be risk takers. And some
Hmm.
of the thinking that I've read about, which makes so much sense, is that because we don't have any system of rites of passage, that lets boys understand it's time to move out of boyhood and move into manhood with the
Yes,
responsibilities, that some of the risk taking is connected with that need to
I think
prove
you're right.
that they are,
Completely.
are moving into manhood.
Yes. I
Yeah.
think that's where sports can be really helpful
Mhm.
because that allows you to practice risk-taking activities. It allows you to practice competition. It allows you to practice status, which
Yeah.
is, teenagers are all about status. So sports, in whatever one you choose, allow you to practice all those key elements that we don't have as a rite of passage anymore in a safe and recognized and encouraged in a
Yeah.
way. So I think that's where sports can be really helpful for boys. I know not all boys enjoy sport, but the ones that do, that tend to be the risk takers, I think that's a safe way to allow them to practice that skill set, to be competitive, to
Yeah.
measure themselves against other young boys and do that in a healthy environment.
Well, I wonder if that's where the rise in extreme sports has come from.
Probably because there's
So,
that again that dopamine thing of getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If I got
yeah.
a dopamine hit for jumping off this, I can go and jump off this. And that's where it starts to get a little bit more extreme. And there are issues around that as well, because when you don't have access to that on a regular basis, you feel as though you have these massive highs, but equally with really big lows. So
Hmm.
sport again can be that middle ground where you can have a good level but you're not overdoing it. You don't have the peaks and troughs of the neurotransmitters that we get used to.
Claire, what excites you most about the future of neuroscience and mental health support for young people, especially our boys?
That's a great question. I think what excites me is this drive to understand why. Because if you know why, you can fix it. And there is definitely a need for more research into the impact of hormones. I mean, I found out today that taking a contraceptive pill shrinks your woman's cortex, it shrinks your volume of your brain. I'm not
Hmm.
sure that's a good idea long term. It's a change, but things like that. I think we need to know why. If that's happening, is it important? What's the equivalent for boys? So I think it's the mechanics that allows us to tap into, because when you know the mechanics, you can either prevent that or you can use it in a strategic way. So that excites me. But I think probably what excites me more at a smaller level is being able to use that knowledge to empower this generation, because a lot of people are critical of young people. They're lazy, they don't know what they're doing, they're entitled, they don't want to do this. I don't find that true at all. And I think you're probably the same in your coaching background. But whenever I meet young people, I am always wowed by how wonderful they are, how full of conversation these allegedly grunting teenagers can be, how excited about their future these unenthusiastic in the classroom children can be when you get interested in them. And I think allowing ourselves to be taught by young people and see them as valuable rather than a nuisance, I think that is something that we can learn. So I think it's empowering a generation that is resilient, that has different skills, but being able to learn from them again. I don't really like the authority, parents, teachers, and children being down here. That lovely collaboration, as you evidence with your son, teach me about this. What do you think? How do that? I learn from my kids all the time. I had a really big discussion with my son yesterday about the health benefits or health detriment of microplastics. Hadn't really thought about it up until that point, but he'd listened to a podcast that had fired him up. And as a result,
Yeah.
we had a brilliant conversation. Learning from the new generations, learning from what they know that we don't, I think that's something we really need to get better at.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
really
what
goes
excites
back.
me at a
Yeah,
personal level.
it really goes back to being curious and not making assumptions.
Mhm.
And so if you're open, you've got another human being there to learn from. But I personally think like because I've, been around for quite a while, the excitement for me is that um, there is research-backed evidence that wasn't available before. Like people
Yep,
maybe had a knowing, they felt it, but now there's
that's how I
proof.
feel. There's
And
proof. And so where you take that, that's the next big thing, isn't it? So
yeah.
having that understanding, as the mechanics, as I call it, allows us to say, well, this is why they do what they do. And
Mhm.
if they're going to do that, this is how we help them do it safely or better or support them to do that. Whether that's in the criminal justice system, whether that's in education, whether that's in a proper shake-up to help children get more sleep. Slightly soapbox about that. There's all sorts of things. Now we know this is what's happening. Now you make it better. When you
Yeah.
know how things work, you do it better.
Yeah, exactly. So if you could create a user manual for raising happy, resilient boys, what are three things that you'd include?
Ooh, I think as we've just said, spend time learning what they love and use that to navigate things together. Find shared interests. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah.
That would be one that I would definitely want to put in there. Um, oh wow, there's just so many, picking a few. Yeah, I think allow your children to try stuff and don't expect them to stick at it. I think we expect a lot of them. If you want to play football this week and play the violin next week, that's fine. You don't have to do something forever. And that applies to your career as well. So I think allowing that, we keep coming back to it, that curiosity, that playfulness, try everything until you find what fits.
Yeah.
because there is something for you. And I think treat your kids, don't be afraid of treating your kids with love. That's okay.
And
Telling your
especially
children they're one,
boys.
especially boys. I think they may shrug off your affection. They may go, "Ooh, don't tell me you love me in front of my friends," but secretly, it's so important. They need to know that you'll love them, whether they're rude, whether they're nasty to you, which they will be at times, whether they're rude, whether they're hungry or thirsty or smelly or late or broken the rules. They need to know that you love them despite that, and no matter what goes on, you are their safe place. And I think that's huge,
Mm.
really, really big. I mean, children are wonderful, but they're also really frustrating. And it's very easy to let that be the primary emotion that they see. You get cross with them. But I think showing them that I don't like what you've done, but I love you, and that's why
Yeah.
we're going to try and do this better, that's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that I've raised two young men that will happily tell me they love me.
Yeah. Me too.
And I think that's a lovely thing.
Well,
It
and I think
started
it's,
It
sorry.
started being slightly facetious and ironic in front of their friends, but now they just do it, and it's just really sweet, and I'm very proud of that. That's important that they know they're loved and that that's their safe space.
Yeah, that's right. And they any child, they only need that one person that they have that with. And if they have
Mhm.
one person that they know loves them unconditionally and they have
Yes.
a space with that person to share every part of them, they will be just fine. No matter what life throws at them, they will be fine because of that one person. So, yeah, I think it's very important.
And I think, part of that unconditional love is allowing them to be angry and ranty and
Mhm.
cross with the world. Because who else are they going to talk to? They can't do that with their friends because their friends are in the same space. They can't do that with their teachers because they don't have that unconditional relationship. So if your child comes home and is being really challenging with you, I'm not saying it's a compliment, but there's a reason. It's because you're the only person they can be that unfiltered version of themselves and know that you'll still love them.
Well, I agree. And I also think, though, that it's our job to understand with boys, especially when they are showing those negative behaviors, that there is something going on emotionally underneath,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that's where we have to support them so that they understand we get them and not just
Hugely.
reacting to the misbehavior.
That's it, isn't it? Because that's them pushing the boundaries, and that's how they find out
Yeah.
where the limits lie. The limits are here. How do you know where the edge of that is unless you push up against it a little bit? You have to. That's how they learn. And I think, understanding that, and sometimes, we have to be parents. We have to call them out on that and say, no, that's an unacceptable thing. That is not okay. But the vast majority of things are negotiable within reason. You can explain why that's a thing, as you demonstrated earlier. And knowing where the rules lie means that they have a firm understanding of how the world works. That even if everything else is really confusing, this is how mum and dad work.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
how my home works, and I feel okay in that space because at least that I understand.
And they understand it because you explain the whys behind it.
Yes, I think you should.
Mhm.
And they need that. I mean, teenagers learn so much. We talked about them learning and how hormones shape their environment and their internal chemistry, but they learn also from experience just as much. The things that we allow them to experience or not experience really shape how they take that forward. So
Yeah.
allowing your child to experience anger and then going, okay, that's one feeling. This is how we deal with it. Experiencing grief, they will do that too. Experiencing all those things in a way that they can see is healthy, that they see us modeling healthy relationships, healthy behaviors, and sometimes Kathy being wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that if I mess up, I apologize to my children.
Yep.
I'm not infallible, and they need to know that.
Yeah.
I also need to be, confident and resilient for them. I need to model that, but I also need to model apologizing and forgiving.
Yeah, I agree. That's very
That's a big
important.
deal.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. I would never ever pull rank on my children and say, well, that's just because how I said it is. If I know I'm wrong, you have to go, look, I'm sorry, that wasn't right. I messed up there. Because
Yeah.
then they know.
Yeah, I think it's quite powerful to do that.
Mm.
Claire, before we finish today, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had?
Oh, Kathy, I could sit here for hours talking about all of this. I think we covered a lot of ground in that space. I think all of that is really important. I think maybe one thing to add to that is if you, as a parent, you are struggling with your boys, with your children generally, don't be too proud to ask for help, whether it's
Mhm.
from other parents, whether it's from professionals, whether it's just reading and getting an insight into how your child thinks. I'm quite often asked for books that kind of explain how being a teenager feels, because as I said earlier, I think we forget how we felt. And even if we did, it's irrelevant because it's 20 years ago and the world will have moved on. So I think don't be afraid to ask for help if you're struggling with your child. It's your first foray into being a parent. Why would you be brilliant at it? There will be things that you get wrong. And asking for help, support, and being honest with that, I think, is something to accept. I know I did that more. I had good friends and family that I could lean on, and I think that's helpful. It's easy to feel that you're failing, and I think asking for help is a good thing to do, personally, professionally, and for your own mental health. Looking after you so you can be the best parent is just as important.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Claire, where can people find more out about your work and how to get in touch with you?
Yes, it is under inspiredtochange.biz. That's the website, and you'll find all of the Inspired to Change therapists there, me and 13 or 14 others who are qualified in the same solution focused hypnotherapy that I practice. You can find me there. You can find me on Facebook as Inspired to Change Maidstone, and on Instagram, a little bit less though, as Inspired to Change underscore Claire.
Okay, I'll make sure that I put all of those in the show notes.
That would be
Before
great.
we
Oh,
end,
and if anybody wants to try that self-hypnosis audio I mentioned, you can download it from the website so you can see what it feels like.
I definitely will. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, before we end, I always ask two questions just for fun. The first one is, what would the title be for a movie about your family life? And then what would be a short summary or synopsis?
Oh, I don't know. Um, my children were very young altogether, so I had three under three. My now ex-husband worked away a lot, so it was just us. So I think probably the synopsis would be barely controlled chaos because they were all very young, going in different directions. In terms of a title, oh, I feel under pressure to be really clever here, but I can't think of any.
No pressure.
No, they're also bilingual, my children, so they speak French and English, which is an interesting background. Um, yeah, it probably ought to have French subtitles then, shouldn't it?
Well, I thought you, when you said three under three, I thought you were saying that's what the title was. And I thought, well, that's interesting.
No,
And then you
that's
could
good.
have it
Yeah,
in
I'm
French.
gonna have that. Yes, I'm gonna have that, Kathy. Three under three.
Okay, so the second question is, picture yourself sharing some wisdom with one of your children, the first child who is going to be bringing in a baby to their own family life. What would you say to them?
Love it. You can't go too far wrong. If you work from a place of love, you can't go too far wrong. But I think, if I'm allowed two bits, I think the second thing is there's a lot of pressure on us to be parents and to be perfect as parents. There is nothing else that we do once that we are expected to be perfect at. Why do we expect ourselves to be perfect parents from the get-go? We will make mistakes, and I think accepting that and just rolling with it is probably taking the pressure off a little bit. So if you work from a place of love, you won't go too far wrong with any mistakes that you make.
Good advice. Claire, thank you for joining me. I know how precious time is, and I hope you feel that I've honored yours today.
I have had the best hour and a bit. It's been an hour and 20 minutes, Kathy. I've been chatting for
I know.
ages.
Sorry.
So, no, it's been wonderful. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here and chat to you about all things brain science. I love to get geeky. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I must say I was really excited to talk about hypnotherapy because I haven't met someone since like that was I was in my 20s,
Mm,
and still I think of it as being the most powerful tool that I've ever been given.
It's underrated as a therapy, and I think the solution-focused element, adding that on to hypnosis, does make it more powerful, and it's empowering. People feel that they're in control, and I think that's a lovely gift to give back to them. So I would encourage people to be curious and find out about that too. It's not about mind control. It's not about me fixing anybody else. It's about the two of us working together to navigate out of where you are. And I think that's a really lovely thing to do. So
Yeah.
yes, I'd encourage people to play with that too. Thank you.
Yeah, I do hope people look into that because there's really that's kind of a golden nugget as far as I can see.
I think particularly for young people because it's teaching them about themselves.
Yeah.
And that's
Hmm.
something that is, if as a skill for life, if you have that self-belief, that self-confidence, and that resilience baked in at an early age, you can cope so much better when things get a bit more rocky. I think that's a good thing to try.
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Claire. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in next week for more conversations about raising boys. If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.